Salutations from space, and welcome back to Astronomy for Astrologers here at Stormy Grace's YouTube University with your host and celestial navigator, Gemini Brett. In part one, we were really tuning into the signs and the constellations, the ecliptic plane, which is the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship, or the plane of the year, right? The year being Earth's annual orbit of the sun. And from Earth's point of view, that's the sun moving about us in a year's time through the constellations and the signs. Let's stop time here. It's now just about 10:59 p.m. I'm at home in Richmond, California on Monday, the day of the moon, March 1st, 2021. As I said in the first part, the moon is so closely aligned right now to Chitra, Spica, the shaft of wheat that the priestess holds, the star to which most sidereal zodiacs are calibrated, right? And so it was cool. I was just outside receiving some of that beautiful silver light from the smile of the moon, which of course is sunlight reflected to my eyes here on Earth. All right, so I think what I'm going to do first here is just bring this down to only the sun and the moon. So let's see, luminaries. That's a little easier to see. This is the sun, the circle of spirit, and the moon, the crescent of soul. Where is the Earth? It is here. The Earth is the cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. Now, moon visits Spica every month. So the moon gets around the chart in a month. Sun is there only every year. Here you see the sun just at about 12 degrees tropical Pisces, because there's 60 arc minutes in 1 degree, right? 30 degrees in a sign. Where is the sun going to be tomorrow? Well, let's just hit the move 1 day forward here in this wonderful software, Astro Gold astrology software. Thanks to them for this copy. The sun, as we said in part one, moves about 1 degree per day. Right? So we're going to move from 12 to tomorrow, March 2nd. There's the sun right around 13. Okay. And look at where the moon went. Let's go back to now. The moon's at 21 Libra right now. It's about 8 degrees from Scorpio. And then tomorrow, she's at 6 degrees Scorpio. She moved 14 degrees in a day. On average, the moon moves 13 degrees per day and the sun 1, okay? And of course, as the moon is applying to the sun, let's move by days here, moving through Scorpio and Sag and Capricorn, right? This is why the secondary motion is often called moonwise. And the different, because all planets do this at a different rate, and moon does it most quickly, gets around the zodiac in like 27 1/3 days, where it takes the sun, of course, 1 year to do so. But here we are now suddenly at March 19th, which is for some places on the earth, but not quite Richmond, California, the time of Aries equinox. Let's move 1 more day. We see the sun in the 1st degree of tropical Aries, which is where? Due east of the center of Earth, right? So soon after that will be Easter, right? And Passover and all that. So, the moon is a beautiful being, and all the other planetests, the wanderers too, but it's only the sun that will tell us what time of year it is by looking at the sun in the chart, right? Let's bring in the whole thing. It's like all these asteroids and other things and planets far from us, or so-called dwarf planets. That's a lot to look at. Maybe we'll do, let's do only the visibles out to Saturn. They all move at different speeds, and it's wonderful to see the moon in Gemini and Mars in Gemini too, and Mercury on the square, right? These geometries expressed by what we call aspects, which surely you will be learning about, and I'll show you some in this astronomy class today. But, Saturn in Aquarius, which happens for a few years, every about 30 years, but that doesn't tell me what time of year it is. Only the sun will tell me what time of year it is. and also what time of day it is. And here I can see it's nighttime. How? And so we've been looking at the secondary motion, right? Like the daily motion, not the daily motion, sorry, the yearly motion, the orbital motion, the different speed for all the planets. But let's look at the daily motion, which we talked about in part 1, the primary motion, the spinning of Earth. Well, we're going to see that if we move, instead of by days, we'll move by hours here. And keep your eye over here at the rising sign. You're going to see that that's changing as we move through time. Well, everything is spinning from the east to the west. So we're certainly not as used to seeing this direction of the chart. But if you go outside and just watch the sky, watch the sunrise and set, you know, this is the motion you see. Here's the moon setting in the west. All right, so this is what we're going to tune in today. What is this cross of matter? We saw this circle of spirit before. Okay, so importantly, it's only the sun that will tell you where we are in the year. Here we see the sun in the 1st degree of tropical Taurus. That means around April 20th, April 21st. All right, here we see the sun in the 12th house, and that means it's just after sunrise. Okay, Saturn in the 10th, that doesn't tell me what time of day it is. Jupiter in Aquarius, that doesn't tell me what time of year it is. It is only the sun. The circle of spirit, the place the sun lives, the one ring that rules them all. All right, let me get back into this presentation and we will move forward. Let's get back to Mr. Dali here, all right? This lunatic, see, the moon is culminating when he's born. What does that mean? All right, well, let's unpack that a bit. We saw this image in part 1 of Dali's chart, right? Thanks to Stellarium Astronomy software, this wonderful planetarium software, we get to see the ecliptic plane there, which we saw is the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship. Here's a different look at that plane. Thanks to Solar System Scope software, you can see the URL in the bottom left. You can play with this wonderful system, Solar System Scope, online for free. They since updated it, and I can't get all the planets in the same screen, which kind of frustrates me, but they've made it more accurate to scale. This is certainly not. But it's cool to see all these planets aligned. And what you're going to see is that the plane of our solar system, right, heliocentric, sun-centered solar system, is relatively flat, yeah? But it's not exactly. All the planets have their own orbital path and their own orbital plane and their own orbital periodicity, the different, right? Let me highlight Pluto's orbital path here, at least what we can see of it on the screen. This is one of the reasons why in 2005, after the astronomers discovered Eris, another so-called dwarf planet, like way further out than Pluto, Pluto was then demoted to dwarf planet status by the astronomers. I mean, the truth is Pluto is made of like rock. He's like a very different being than the gas giants which exist, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Like they're different kinds of planets than the so-called terrestrial or rocky planets, which are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Then there's this asteroid belt, and then the gas giants, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and then Pluto and these other so-called dwarf planets, which are of a different composition. They're much smaller, they're rocky, they have very eccentric orbits, very elliptical orbits. No orbit's actually circular, they're all ellipses, but for Pluto and beyond, they're like very stretched. And they're also very they're very oblique, which is like the distance they are from the ecliptic, which remember is one of these. It's the plane of our planet, Earth, third rock from the sun, right? The plane of our orbit about the sun is the ecliptic. And for the most part, the planets are kind of hanging out there. Like, let's actually look back here. The sun will always be on the ecliptic. That's the definition of the ecliptic. And at the time of Dali's birth, the moon is there. because she is very close to one of the lunar nodes. I'll speak more about the nodes when I teach eclipses down the line. Venus here is what's called south of the ecliptic plane. Saturn as well, Jupiter as well. So all the planets have their own orbital planes, all have their own orbital paths, which is what we're seeing here, okay? The ecliptic is the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship. Now, the chart only has one circle. So we project, we pull all the planets to the ecliptic. We say they live on that Earth-Sun plane. The circle of spirit, as I like to call it, or like the one ring that rules them all, to get into Lord of Rings talk. Anyway, so Pluto, very oblique, separates from the ecliptic plane by like 17 degrees. All right, but most importantly, what I want to show there is that every planet has its own plane, has its own path, and they all have nodes, which is where their orbital plane crosses the ecliptic. Enough of that for now. What is a chart? It's an expression of a moment in time. Every moment in time has a unique sacred geometry of planetary alignments, one that will never, ever, ever, ever repeat. You are a unique moment, you know, an expression of a unique moment. And there could have been a child born elsewhere in the exact same moment as you, but they were born elsewhere, all right? So we're going to see how that's going to make a very significant difference. Not with the planets and the signs, but with the planets and the houses. Okay. This is the moment called Salvador Dali. So let's bring his nativity in here. And I want to show you a really important thing. You know, I mean, this is one challenge that like rationalist astronomers have with astrology too. It's like, hey, why are you guys doing this geocentric, Earth-centered thing? Haven't you heard of Copernicus? Like, we know the sun's at the center of the solar system. And I love actually seeing that heliocentric image of the solar system for any moment using solar system scope or other horary, like other programs that let us see all the planets in this kind of arrangement. It's cool. Like that's Dali too, right? All right. So sun-centered means helio, or heliocentric means sun-centered. And we can cast heliocentric charts too. This is not one that we're looking at. And we can see here, when we look from this ecliptic plane, remember what is the ecliptic? It is the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship, Earth's orbital path. And that is the circumference of our chart wheel. But I'm not going to color it blue. I'm going to color it gold, right? Because this is a geocentric or Earth-centered charts. And for the most part, I imagine in this course, you'll be using only geocentric or Earth-centered charts. Why? Because you're on Earth, you know? So why should we be given a hard time for using geocentric charts? Shouldn't we be concerned most with the earthly experience and what's happening on Earth? Yes. Look in the chart here, we're going to see this conjunction, triple conjunction. At the time of Dali's nativity, this is Sun and Mercury, who is retrograde. Astro Gold shows that by red font. And Mars, all in the sign of Taurus and very close to one another, within 5 degrees of one another. All right, is that happening from the sun's point of view? No, all right? For the sun, Mercury, the closest to the sun, and Mars, the fourth rock, are actually opposite, right? Not exactly, but pretty much opposite one another at this time. Not to mention, the sun's not going to see itself in the chart, right? This is an Earth-centered chart. So let's realign this to put Earth at the center. And now what do we see? We see Mercury, Sun, Mars, all conjoined. We can learn if we study more astronomy that this is that, right? You see on the chart, it just looks like they're all together, but this I can very easily see in this chart without having to look at a heliocentric solar system that because Mercury's retrograde, he's between Earth and the sun. Because Mars is direct and Mars can only be when with the sun on the other side of the sun from Earth's point of view, because he's an exterior planet, exterior to Earth's orbital path, that this is Earth, which is the center of the chart, Mercury, Sun, Mars. So that was happening at Dali's birth moment, right? Mars is actually in Taurus right now. It's the last days in Taurus. So happy recent Mars return, Mr. Dali. All right. So geocentric, Earth-centered, right? I mean, where we can see it's not from Sun. Look for the Sun. Venus and Jupiter are conjoined in the moment of Dali's birth. That's not happening from Earth. Venus is that way and Jupiter's that way. Do you see what I'm saying? So these aspects in the chart, they're all measured from Earth and from the center of Earth. The signs are measured from the center of Earth. I think that they actually emanate from there, at least for the tropical zodiac. Okay. You can see right here the sun glyph. Okay, so it's the ecliptic from Earth's point of view, again, is the sun's annual path about us. See that? This is called the circumpunct, and it's the image we use for the sun, whether we want to see it as the Earth going about the sun or the sun going about all of the Earth. There you go. Has a lot more to say than that, but there's a clue. This is what we're doing in a chart, right? Even though we know these planets are, different distances from Earth, we've known that for a long time. There's old images of these like planetary shells. Earth and the moon is closest, then Mercury and Venus, then the sun, and then Mars and Jupiter and Saturn, stars, zodiac, spirit. Now we know Uranus, Neptune, Pluto in the mix, some asteroids closer, some Eris and other dwarf planets further, right? But we show them in the chart, like all on this one circle, the one ring that rules them all. I mean, we know that the moon is the closest because she's getting around the fastest. We know that Pluto's like the furthest, and at least with the planets that I'm showing here, because Pluto takes like 250 years to get around. Saturn's the last visible light, the slowest, about 29.5 years to get around, okay? But this is really what a chart is. It's a geocentric Earth at the center. And we're projecting, we're pulling all these planets to the circle of spirit, to the ecliptic plane, right? And half of Earth is always in shadow, the night side. Yeah, when Dali was born, and a lot of these images, these animations are from an astrolocality class I've taught. So I've studied a lot of Dali and his maps. I know that when Dali was born, the sun was directly above Saudi Arabia. And Dali was born over here in Spain. Where Dali was born, the moon was not directly above at the zenith, that's the top of the sky, but was culminating at the midheaven. We're going to look at what does that mean. And that phase angle of moon and sun measured, interestingly, from the center of Earth. These other aspects we see, everything measured from the center of Earth. So there's like, Mercury, Sun, and Mars, who we saw were conjunct in the chart, they're square and 90 degrees away from Saturn. We see Venus and Neptune are sextile. It's a very powerful aspect or relationship, geometrical relationship. Where from the center of Earth, it's a very powerful one, Venus sextile Neptune for an artist. Sun, Saturn, I got that one too. That can be some issues with authority figures, parents, father. So all that applies to Dali and maybe to me. Anyway, let's honor this truth, as above, so below, one of the Hermetic axioms. Well, as I've said a few times now, we're actually measuring the placement of the planets in the signs, not from the surface of the Earth where we live and breathe and witness the heavenly happenings, but rather from the center of the Earth. where we are all one. I think that's a beautiful thing, actually. And for me, the cosmology is much like a celestial symphony. I actually do a lot of work where my dear friend Eric Deutsch, a genius piano player, and I work together to create songs of people's birth charts based on this map of kind of sign, note, or key correlation. And it's a long tail. If you want to check that out, check out geminibrett.com. And on the services page or the work with me page, you'll find something about the song of the soul. And that's really come in through my contemplations. Well, first of all, my devotion of really wanting to find more embodied and sensual and body mind ways where we can experience our astrology, get it out of the head and bring it in, you know. And that's what the astronomy is about for me, or sacred geometry. There's many sister traditions of our sacred science, which harmony is part of. But I feel it because it's like this. It's like, you know, it's like all these planets are like instruments that all have their unique timbre and tone. And in this cosmology, it's like they play the note of the sign in which they reside. So when Dali was born, we got Venus and Sun and retrograde Mercury and Mars all in the sign of Taurus. I was a, you know, artist. So they're all in my cosmology. There are 4 different instruments playing the note B flat. And that's resonating, this whole chord. There's like the celestial chord happening in every moment, you know, this vibration, and it's vibrating in this center of Earth, right? The above, those planets up there, we're measuring from the below, from the center of the Earth. So the cosmology would be like there's a celestial symphony, they're surrounding the planet, you know, and in the heart of our planet, there's that chord is resonating. And from there, she kind of broadcasts it spherically everywhere to all of her earthlings simultaneously, right? So these 3 yogis that we see here, they're going to all experience the same chord in regards of the planets in the signs, which maybe for the last time, I don't think so, actually. Redundancy is built into every great space mission. The signs are measured from the center of the Earth, not the houses, right? So these folks on the surface are going to have different experiences of that same song. It's like, you know, the heart resonance is the same, but if you're surrounded by a circle of musicians, isn't your experience going to be different if you're like facing the trumpet player with your back to the flute than it is if you're facing the flute with your back to the trumpet, right? So this yogi here, like, you know, tree pose, is facing Saturn instrument, right? Here we have that kind of warrior pose facing Mars and Pluto. And down here, this one without a planet culminating, but on the exact opposite side of the Earth in that moment from where Jupiter is. In that moment, because primary motion, the Earth is spinning, right? Here we see this yogi going into sunset, and here into sunrise, and here into the middle of the night, and here into Uranus culminating above. That was midday. Saturn above, right? The moon. You'll see the moon's moving here too, right? Because as the Earth is spinning, time, all the planets are also moving. That's their secondary motion, their orbital motion, right? So importantly, the planets in the signs, oh, I did say it again, from the center of the Earth, from the whole, the below, where we are all one. The planets in the houses, however, from the surface of the Earth, the particular, right? A different language is spoken in Canada than in Saudi Arabia, than in Japan. Different cuisines, the particular, the surface, right? We're all different, but at the center, we're all one. Center, whole, below signs, surface, above particular houses. This, of course, as we've seen, it's because the Earth is spinning on the axis, the primary motion, bringing us such hits as sunrise and sunset, of moonrise and moonset. Jupiter rise and Jupiter set. Sirius rise and Sirius set. Orion rise and Orion set. The twins rising and setting, right? Because of Earth's daily rotation, daily spin, bringing the planets through the houses and the signs through the houses. So oddly, some astrologers kind of teach like signs and houses are the same thing. No. The signs every day rise and reach and rest and root, moving through the houses. Okay. So that cross of matter, right? The spine of Gaia, the celestial equator, the circle of matter, which define, as we saw in part 1, the cardinal directions where the cardinal cusps of the tropical zodiac align. Well, many shamanic wisdom traditions from all around the globe are about the energies of the cardinal directions. And I would suggest that the tropical zodiac is one of these systems because as I showed in part 1, it is a directional system. That's the global essence of the tropical zodiac, right? Yes, it's seasonal, but we have seasonal opposition between the northern and the southern hemisphere. The north is north everywhere on Earth. Well, except at the North Pole where it's nowhere because everywhere is south. But I digress. This image here is often called the medicine wheel. And interestingly, there are images with very similar colors, actually, the same colors in some medicine wheel traditions from Greece that are about these cardinal directions. I'm going to realign this thing from north at the top, which is how we're used to looking at a compass and how this is often shown from like Lakota, Dakota, Nakota tradition, like other different Native American traditions, the Mayan who do their color scheme just a little bit different. This is how I learned the medicine wheel and Lakota work, but then I'm realigning it now, keeping the same colors from how I've learned them and from what I understand was also seen in some of the ancient Greek, but aligning it in a way that a chart is aligned, at least a northern hemisphere chart. And the truth is, while we should learn how the chart works both in northern hemisphere and southern hemisphere, and maybe I can make like a southern hemisphere like addendum here, I'm going to connect to and teach the northern hemisphere. We'll look at Dali as an example. And the reason why is we do both and it can get twice as confusing, but also primarily why is because our astrology charts are designed to reflect the northern hemisphere experience of the sky. All right. Where south is up. What? No, south's not up. I'll show you where it is. All right. These are called the quadrants. This is the earth glyph, right? Makes me want to drink another cup of tea. The cross of matter inside the circle of spirit. The cross of matter is the angles. Well, at least where the cross intersects the circle of spirit, which is what? The ecliptic plane, the plane of the Earth-Sun relationship. And for the most part, our solar system, because our solar system relatively flat. So there's that circle of spirit. What's in the very middle? Well, the center of Earth on a global perspective, signs. But what about in a particular perspective? You, the eye. Okay? And the horizontal line, this one's pretty easy to remember, is the horizon, the ground that you're standing on, the ground that mother was laying on as she gave birth to you. Where the horizon intersects the ecliptic in the east is called the ascendant. Now, what do we do here? We brought in the ground, okay? Because first and foremost, the horizon divides the chart wheel into two hemispheres. There's above the ground and there's below the ground. We can see the stuff above, we can't see the stuff below. Our horizon divides the the sphere of the heavens into halves. It's called a great circle. Any great circle divides the sphere into halves, right? So we have our half above ground and our half below ground. All right. Now where the ecliptic, the circle of spirit, intersects the eastern horizon, that's the ascendant, the rising sign. It's rising. The Earth is the center of the chart, and the Earth spins from the west to the east. So our experience of that primary motion, that rotation, which we spoke about in part 1, is the heavens rising in the east and setting in the west. So this is the primary motion of the chart. Now we're used to looking at charts and going, okay, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, and it's all going this way. That is true for the secondary motion. But as I showed at the beginning of this transmission, the primary motion goes this way, rising into the 4th quadrant, interestingly moving to the 3rd. Well, how do we divide this thing from hemispheres into quadrants? We need the vertical line, which is the meridian. And the midheaven is on the meridian. The midheaven, or MC, medium cele, the middle of the heavens, okay? So the sun rises in the east at the ascendant. It sets in the west at the descendant. Or I like to say rise and rest, okay? Eastern horizon, rise, western horizon, set. We've all seen that. In the northern hemisphere, halfway between sunrise and sunset, the sun is always at the midheaven. In the northern hemisphere, that's due south. In the southern hemisphere, it's due north. All right, but I'm going to stick northern hemisphere. And we, again, like I said, we could do like a southern hemisphere bonus video, short video. All right, well, what is a meridian? Right, you see the eye is the center, horizon, the horizontal line, meridian, the vertical line. The meridian is your local expression of Gaia's spine. It is a great circle that divides the dome in half. That's not horizontal, that's the horizon, but rather vertical. And it's a line that's always due north, due south, right? So you may know these meridians as lines of longitude, right? Earthly longitude, I should say. So these are all different meridian lines, and every line in between too, right? I think this will probably stop at the Meridian of Figueres, Spain, where Dali was born. Oh, it looks like we're a little bit off of there. This is called the Prime Meridian, which passes through Greenwich, England. But importantly, you have your own meridian, and your birthplace, if you don't live there today, has its own specific meridian. Now that meridian is actually shared by everywhere north and due south of that place, right? So this one in Greenwich, England, is pretty close to like, Paris and Figueres, Spain, and down into Africa and many places, okay? So the meridian intersects the ecliptic, or the zodiac, above the ground at the midheaven, and below the ground at the immocele, which means the bottom of the heavens, right? Is that hell? No, not necessarily, all right? It's just the farthest point below the ground, kind of. And that's going to get a little bit more advanced. I think we'll address that a little bit in part 3, okay? But for now, I just really want to be with these 4 quadrants. So again, let's just talk about the sun. The sun rises in the east at the ascendant. Then it reaches its highest height for the day at the midheaven, where it pivots. These angles, ascendant, midheaven, descendant, and the IC, were once called kentrons, pivots. Why? Because at the pivot of the ascendant, I move from below the ground and invisible to rising, above the ground and visible. What's the pivot at the midheaven? I'm moving from climbing and getting higher to now going down. What's the pivot at the descendant? I'm moving from above the ground and visible to below the ground and invisible. And now I root down at the IC. Halfway between sunset and sunrise, the sun is at the IC, which is below ground. In the northern hemisphere, due north, but below ground. In the southern hemisphere, due south, below ground. All right. So now we have 4 quadrants divided by horizontally the horizon and vertically the meridian. Now I'm talking about the sun rising, reaching, resting, rooting. That's what I call these 4 angles by the 4 R's, because that's what's happening at these places. And it's not just for the sun. Moonrise, halfway between moonrise and moonset. Moon reach, halfway between moonset and moonrise. Moon roots, down at the bottom of the heavens, okay? The sun is there in the middle of the night, which is oddly where we begin our days. Like, what? But it's kind of cool, right? Because that's where the sun begins the daily climb. And we have evidence of this when the sun crosses the ascendant, that pivot that brings it now into visible places. And it rises into the 4th quadrant. And then moves into the 3rd, coming down, and then into the 2nd, and then into the 1st. What? That's so backwards. We're going to look into why next part. And we will also look into why, as the computers draw these charts these days, depending on your settings and the house system you elect, but in quadrant house systems, which divide the houses or the quadrants by the angles, the rise, the reach, the rest, and the root, the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, and the IC, the way the computers draw them these days often show us a lot of cool astronomy, but it can be weird because it's like, wait a second, why is the vertical line not vertical? How is it that, unlike that plus cross of the earth glyph, right, that like in Dali's chart, we get the midheaven at 3 Aries, which is square 3 Cancer. So we have to move another 19 to get to 22 Cancer. So that's a square of 90 degrees plus 19, 109 degrees. What's up with that? Right? Well, let's tune into that in the next part. Got to plug my stuff. If you're digging this, please come study with me at a Earth's pace and slow it down. I really want to teach at least like the fundamental stuff of signs and houses here in this transmission to kind of tune you in. So as you're looking at these charts, you have an experience of what's actually happening on Earth, the most important planet, the planet you chose, right? But I would love to show you this and much more at a slower pace. And when you're ready to do that, come find me at GeminiBrett.com, head to the courses page. And there's a 6-week Sacred Astronomy for Astrologers course with lots of Q&A, very slow transmissions, slower transmissions. And they're like 10-minute, 15-minute, little bits. So anyway, once again, I honor your presence, your awareness, your patience with this information. Let it sink in. If it's strange, just take your time with it. After you learn a bunch of astrology, come back, check it out again. And most importantly, not just these small screens, get outside and check it out on the big screen of the living sky. That's what we're going to do next time in part 3, the final part of this Astronomy for Astrologers, by me anyway, for Stormie Grace's YouTube University. So I will see you in part 3. This is your friendly astronaut, Gemini Brett, signing off. I will see you in space.